Hello there, my name's Andy, I'm Technique Editor for Digital Photo Magazine, and in this video tutorial I'm going to be showing you how you can use smarter dodging and burning to take a portrait like this and transform it into something a bit more like this, really making those eyes pop and making the exposure a lot more balanced. Now this first shot was taken with a softbox, that's to say a strobe light in a sort of diffuse piece of fabric to make the light a bit softer on the right hand side, and as you can see the right hand side is fairly well exposed, but the left hand side is of course in shadow. So how can we ameliorate that or fix that in post using smarter dodging and burning? Well, I'm going to show you now, so I'll close down this window and we'll get started from scratch. So the first thing to do is click on File, then go to Open, navigate to your Start Images folder and double click on Portrait. And that'll open up in Photoshop. If you press Ctrl and 0, you can see that full screen. So let's jump straight into the tutorial. First, you're going to want to create a new layer. You can do that by clicking on this icon down here. If you hover over it, it'll say something along the lines of Create a New Layer, or you can hit Shift, Ctrl, Alt and N to do that with a keyboard shortcut. Next, activate your gradient tool, which is this icon over here, or G on your keyboard. And in the options at the top there, make sure that we've got foreground to transparent, make sure that white is your foreground color, make sure that it's a linear gradient, and make sure that reverse is unticked. We'll need transparency ticked because we're using the foreground to transparent template. Okay, click outside of that menu to close it. And now what we're going to do is drag from around the edge of the hair to the center of the face to try and create a whiter area on the dark side of the face. We're going to leave this side alone because that's pretty well exposed already, but we need to brighten this side. So let's start inside the hair somewhere and just drag over towards the bridge of the nose and then release. That's not bad. I want to get a bit more of that eye in, so I'm just going to start at the edge of the face and drag in towards the bridge of the nose. That's not bad. I'm going to go a little closer again. Okay, so now we've got our gradient. All we have to do is change the blending mode from normal. Click on where it says normal, and from that drop down menu select soft light. And as you can see, that's brightened up this left hand side and has taken away some of those harsh shadows, but it's also created a bit of a mismatch in terms of the colors on that dress. So let's drop the opacity down to 30%. That looks pretty good. Now, because this part of the dress is still lighter than this part of the dress, I think I'm going to activate this eraser tool, which is E on your keyboard, and with a soft round brush like that one, I'm just going to brush very briefly over the dress here to darken it. That's good. And then I'm going to activate my brush tool, and with white as my foreground color, I think that this left eye is a little bit brighter than the right eye at the moment. So I'm just going to click once in the right eye to see if I can equalize those two. And that's had the effect I was looking for. If I turn this layer off and on, you can see that the left side of the image has brightened up a bit, and that eye on the right is now looking a little bit brighter as well. Okay, that's a pretty good start. Let's move on to step 2. This is where the smarter dodging and burning comes in. We're going to need to create another new layer, so click on that new layer icon there, or hit Shift, Ctrl, Alt and N on your keyboard. Make sure that your brush tool is still active, but this time we're going to use black as our foreground color. So I'm just going to hit that double-headed arrow to switch the foreground and background colors, and we'll zoom in nice and tight on the eyes because we're going to start to add definition and pop to these eyes. And we're going to do that by essentially accentuating what is dark with a black brush and accentuating what is light with a white brush. So I'm going to follow the shape of her eyelashes with this black brush, the upper and lower eyeliner lines, and I'm going to make the brush a little narrower and just follow these eyelashes too, add a little bit of contrast there. Obviously right now it's a flat black line and it looks very, very odd indeed, but we're not going to leave it like this. We're going to make some changes, soften this effect to make sure that it doesn't look odd at all. I'm going to zoom in a little closer with Ctrl and plus. I'm going to hold down the spacebar to drag around, and I'm going to accentuate this dark line around the edge of the iris. Okay, let's hold down the spacebar, travel over to the other side and do the same again. So we'll just follow that line around the iris to darken it all the way up to the top, and then go along the eyeliner. We're essentially boosting the existing makeup at this point. We're not really adding, we're simply accentuating. Follow that line, make your brush nice and small, and then paint over some of these eyelashes to give them a bit of a boost, to make them look a little bit thicker, a little bit darker. Excellent. Now we're done. All we have to do, I'll zoom out once with Control and minus so you can see both eyes at the same time. Now all we have to do is change the blending mode to soft light. Click on where it says normal and change that to soft light. Drop the opacity to 40%. That should take the edge off that effect. I'll zoom in a little so you can see that eye nice and clearly, and then I'll go up to Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur, and I'll use a radius of around 2.2 pixels. Just about there should be fine. If I turn the preview off and on, you can see the slight softening effect that's taking place. So I'll click OK there, and I'll zoom out a little with Control and minus, and I'll just turn this layer off and on so you can see the difference. So there's a distinct difference between the before and after, and we're slowly getting some of that localized contrast and accentuation that we're looking for. And because we've done it on a new layer, a separate layer, we're not affecting any of the pixels in the original image. So this is completely non-destructive, and that's why it's smarter. So if you wanted to, you could increase the opacity like that, or decrease the opacity, and you can make adjustments like that to the shadows and the highlights separately. So your dodging and burning layers are separate, and no pixels were harmed in the making of this effect. So let's put that back at around 40%, and we'll move on to the next step. So the next step is to create another new layer, and this time we'll do our dodging. The last layer was the burning, so this layer is the dodging. I'm going to zoom in nice and tight again, and this time I'm going to make white my foreground color, and I want to accentuate these beautiful irises. So I'm going to make my brush a little bigger, and I'm going to start somewhere around here, the lighter portion of the iris, and I'm going to draw sort of a U shape or a horseshoe shape running all the way around the iris, being careful not to touch the black outline of the iris or the black pupil in the center of the eye. I don't want to paint over those because I've just painted them black, and it would be a fairly unusual thing to then paint them white. I'll hold down the space bar and drag over to the other eye, and we'll do the same again. Starting at the top, draw a U shape all the way around. I'm catching the reflection of the softbox in the eye, so I can brighten that a bit. That makes a nice catch light. And there we go. I'll zoom out with Control and minus so you can see both eyes. Now obviously that's far too strong an effect at the moment, so let's do something about that. We'll change the blending mode first from normal to overlay. And that's nice and bright, but still too strong. Let's drop the opacity to 25%. That looks a bit better. I can turn that off and on, and you can see the effect we've had on the image. The eyes are looking a little bit pale, maybe a little bit paler than her real eye color, so we'll fix that in a future step. But for now, let's just take the harsh edge off that line. It's looking a little bit sharp, so we'll go up to Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur, and once again I'll use a pixel radius of around 2.2 pixels. Click OK, and now I'll turn that layer off and on, and you can see the effect we've had. So we really made those irises pop out. It's looking a lot more eye-catching now. But as I said, the colors are looking a little bit washed out. In fact, her eyes were a little bit browner and greener than they're appearing on this shot. So I think I need to reinstate or boost those colors. So I'm going to do that with another adjustment layer. So let's click on this adjustment layer icon, and from that list we'll select Vibrance. Now bear in mind here, I'm only making this adjustment for the eyes, so I want to focus on the eyes and ignore any changes that happen to the skin or the hair at first. So let's drag that Vibrance slider all the way up to about +90, so it's nice and strong. And the eyes, they could do with being a little bit browner still, so I'm going to drag the saturation slider up to +25. And that's looking a bit more like her natural eye color. Of course, something awful has happened to the skin here. That tends to happen when you increase the saturation. But don't worry, we're going to fix that. If I close this properties box, you'll be able to see that on the adjustment layer, there's this white rectangle, and that is a layer mask. That was created automatically at the same time as we created the adjustment layer. And this is designed for hiding or removing any parts of the adjustment that you don't want. Now, rather than paint out all of her face and all of the background, which would take a little while, I'm just going to hit Control and I on my keyboard to invert the colors of the mask. So what was white has become black. And when you're dealing with a layer mask, black hides the effect. Anything that's in black is hidden, anything in white is shown. So the entire mask is black, which means the entire effect is being hidden. So I'm going to activate my brush tool again, and with white as my foreground color, I can simply paint into the irises to restore the effect. And as I paint in, you'll see that iris becomes a lot more richly colorful. We'll do the same over here, just paint into the iris. And now her natural eye color has been restored. If I turn that layer off and on, you can see the changes that have taken place. That's looking a lot better. I'll zoom out slightly, and now I'm going to hold down the Alt key and click on the eye icon next to the bottom layer, and that's going to isolate that background layer so we can see what the image looked like before we started doing anything, like that. And then if we do the same again, Alt click on that eye, we can see what happens when all of the effects are turned back on. It's looking much better. Okay, let's move on to the next step then. This time we're going to try to accentuate her bone structure with some dodging and burning. So we'll create another new layer, and we'll make sure that our brush tool is activated with white as our foreground color, and make sure that the brush is pretty soft. Have a look at the print version of the mag, and we're going to try and copy that template onto this model's face. Essentially what you're doing is painting white into any areas that you want to come forward, and painting black into any areas that you want to go backwards. Anything white should become more prominent, and anything black should become less prominent. And in doing that, you are creating a sense of depth, a sense of definition, a sense of bone structure. You're not exactly adding to her face or changing her face in any way. You're just accentuating the natural bone structure that's there already. Okay, so that's the template as it's published in the magazine. We've brightened up the bridge of the nose, the cheeks, the upper lip, etc. Now what we need to do is soften it, so let's change that layer's blending mode to soft light once again. The edges of these lines are still looking a little bit too harsh and sharp for my liking, so let's go to Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur. And because this is a much bigger line, we're going to need a bigger pixel radius, so let's drag that up to around 10, and that should soften that line nicely. I'll turn the preview off and on again. Yep, that's looking much better. I'll click OK to accept those changes. And finally, the effect is obviously still too strong, so let's drop the opacity from 100 down to 15%. And there we go, that's looking much better. I'll turn the effect off and on again, and it's subtle, but it is visible. Okay, let's do the shadows now. So once again, create a new layer by clicking on that icon or hitting Shift, Control, Alt and N on your keyboard. And this time we'll have black as our foreground color. And once again, an example template is printed in the magazine for you, so you can copy what you see on the page or copy what I'm doing on the screen. So I'm creating some black lines here to accentuate her cheekbones. Any black lines you paint around the edge of the face will create a shadow and have a slight slimming effect. So I'll just paint some lines around the edge there, and I'll do a similar thing under the jawline. That'll create a nice sense of separation between the jaw and the neck. Okay, and with those lines created, once again we're going to want to soften them, so let's change the blending mode from normal to soft light. Go back up to Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur, and we'll use the same pixel radius of around 10 pixels for this. Click OK, and finally let's reduce the opacity from 100% down to 10%. We don't want the darkening effect to be too strong because that could make the model look a little bit craggy, a little bit too aged. So we'll leave that at 10%. And if I turn that off and on again, you can see the slight bone structure boost that we've given her face there. And same with the shadow layer, there it is. Okay, and if I turn all of those layers off and on at the same time by holding down the Alt key and clicking on this icon, you'll see the changes we've made. Okay, that's quite a difference. Next, I feel like the image as a whole is still a little bit on the dark side, and I prefer a high key look to my portrait, so I'm going to add a levels adjustment layer. So click on the adjustment layer icon and choose levels from that list. Now you could tweak the shadows here, the highlights here, and the midtones here to your heart's content, but an easy way to do this is to click on auto, and if you do that, Photoshop will attempt to fill the histogram by bringing this point to the start of the image data and bringing the shadows point to the start of the image data to create a sort of full range of lights and darks. And if I just close that properties box and turn the layer off and on, you can see that it's done a pretty good job there. Now that is a nicely balanced exposure, but if anything, I like my portraits to be even brighter and even more high key than that. So finally, I'm going to merge all of the visible layers to a new layer at the top of the stack by holding down Shift, Control, Alt and E, and that will merge all of the visible layers to a new layer. And now all I need to do is to change the blending mode from normal to screen, and that has a really strong brightening effect on the image, so much so that it's actually blown out some of the highlights on the right hand side. So let's reduce that opacity to somewhere around 30%. That looks much better to me. So I'll hold down the spacebar and drag her face so it's just inside the frame. And now if I alt click on the original layer, we can see that it used to look like this, And now it's starting to look a bit more like this. And I would say that that is a big improvement. Those irises have been given a lot more pop, and the image as a whole looks much more bright and inviting. So let's hit Control and minus to zoom out, and there we have it. That is how to apply smarter dodging and burning to a portrait to improve bone structure and make those irises really pop. I hope you've enjoyed watching this video tutorial. Give this technique a go on one of your portrait images. When you've got a shot you like, why not upload it to our Facebook page at facebook.com/digitalphotouk. We always look forward to seeing your shots, and if you upload them there, the digital photo community can see, like, and comment on your images as well. Okay, that's all from me for this time. I'll speak to you again in the next video. Bye bye for now.